Well, good day to everybody. Welcome to Faith Seeking Understanding. I am Alan Bevere, your host. I am a pastor, retired, a professor, a Bible moth, a theologian in exile, and a peddler of hope. And I am the self-appointed Anselm of Canterbury Chair of Podcast Theology and Culture at Faith Seeking Understanding University, a completely fabricated institution of higher learning, but where all seekers are invited to ponder profound things. And today, our show is Believing is Seeing. And I'm so pleased to have Sarah Wells, who is with us, to have conversation about her book, Ordinary Time Meditations from the In-Between. And Sarah, how are you today?
I'm doing great. I love the Peddler of Hope in particular of
Yeah,
your
I'm a peddler of hope.
podcast.
I
It's
believe in
wonderful.
hope. Jesus has been raised from the dead, and so there's hope.
Amen.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. So I love your book, by the way. I
Thank
just
you.
loved how you take your own life's experiences and you see larger things in that,
Yes. Yeah.
which I think we need to do more of. So I really appreciated that very much. So ordinary time. So before we get into the book itself, tell us a little bit about yourself. And you are a writer. You've written
Yes.
several books. So talk to us a little bit about yourself and your writing.
Sure. Well, I have the privilege and blessing to be able to write pretty much full time these days. I'm also a wife and a mother, and so busy mother of three teenagers, one who just started college. So I'm experiencing 1/3 of an empty nest. We're on our way out, which is a little bizarre and surreal to experience, but we are loving this season of life. Um, I am primarily a poet and essayist when it comes to my creative writing, but I also write as professionally. I write a lot of marketing content and have the opportunity to work for a few different businesses, helping them work on and develop course content and script writing. And pretty much my life is writing or reading somebody else's writing. So it's a really lovely existence that I get to have these days.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I should mention that you live here in Ashland locally, so that's where you and I see each other quite frequently at Goldberry Coffee. So we
That's
had some
right.
conversation about this book. So I just appreciate you taking the time. So it is a wonderful. It is wonderful to be able to write, isn't it? I mean, I'm
Yeah.
retired now, so I can write more. You know, when you're working full time, you write when you can, and now I'm able to do that more. That really is such a joy, isn't it?
It really is. Yes. The power of our personal testimony is just such a significant gift that
Yeah.
I feel like the Lord has given us, and the opportunity to be able to put that into written words and share in a, broader capacity is a real blessing and a real gift. I love it.
Do you find I've talked with different writers, you know, and some say, you know, writing is really difficult. They're good writers, but they find getting those words out can be a real challenge. And then other writers, it just flows out. Which do you tend to be?
I definitely land in the flowing category. I find
Okay.
writing to be a real joy, and there aren't a whole lot of areas in my life where I feel energized afterward. Usually I'm depleted. Like, if I'm teaching or speaking to a small group of people, it might be fun in the moment, but afterward I'm exhausted. And the
Yeah.
opposite is true for me in writing. I can spend hours writing and come out completely energized and filled to the brim, and just
You sound
really
like you sound
enjoy the
like a true
process.
introvert.
Yes.
Very good.
Fully.
Okay. All right. So the book we're going to talk about Ordinary Time Meditations from the In Between. What was it that motivated you first to write this book?
Well, it is an essay collection. So it began as individual essays, meditating on different seasons and moments in my life that have been influential or challenging. And then the more that I was working through those different essays, the more I started to see themes emerging, more of a collection around the liturgical calendar and kind of the season of life that I'm in right now, being middle age. My children are about to leave the house, but a lot of the essays were written and take place after the major events of our early adult lives had happened already. That kind of middle space where you feel like you're just going through a lot of the same routines and motions all the time. But that ordinary time of our lives was really influenced by the earlier Advents and Easter seasons and Passover seasons, those kinds of things that continue to pop back up again over and over in your ordinary days. So that's kind of what a lot of the essays are wrestling with, is just what does our spiritual lives look like in the midst of very ordinary, mundane moments, and where do we see the Lord popping back up and being present in those spaces. So a lot of that kind of stuff, wrestling a lot with the big questions and seeing on the horizon things that are happening in my parents' lives and in the future, that all kind of inform the decisions that I'm trying to make here at 40 or 42 now.
Yeah, why don't you talk just a little bit about ordinary time in the liturgical calendar for those
Mhm.
who may not be completely familiar with the liturgical calendar? They may know Advent and Lent, but they don't really know
Yes.
the rhythm of the church calendar and how ordinary time connects. Can you explain a little bit about that?
Sure. The way I like to think about the liturgical calendar is that, we have the commonly known seasons of the church, of Advent, where we're anticipating the arrival and birth of Jesus. And then the Lenten season that leads into Easter and the Holy Week, as really monumentous points in the church calendar. But wrapped around all of those really high seasons in the church is this season of ordinary time. And I like to think of it as the time when Jesus was just like living out his life, the period of time we don't really see a whole lot of in scripture necessarily, and there's so much of our lives that are similar in that way. We have our seasons where we might be anticipating the birth of a child, or anticipating a marriage, or knowing that a family member is in the last days of their lives. And those are our Advents and Lenten seasons. But in between, there's so much of this kind of feels like empty space, but so much is happening in that ordinary space as well. So um, that's how I think about that ordinary season, ordinary time of like, what is Jesus doing in the everyday of our lives?
Yeah, it's interesting that you say this, because one of the things, I think we live in a culture where we are seeking the latest big experience, whether it's in worship, right? We want to go to worship and have it be exciting, and energetic, and we want that big experience. And yet, the truth of the matter is, most of life is routine, and those big experiences. Well, first of all, I don't speak for anybody else, but I say for myself, I can't live a life of those kinds of experiences every day. It would wear me out, right?
Right.
So, so we're always looking for that, and I think sometimes if we don't get that, we somehow think we have missed something. You're saying in your book, those routine, ordinary moments are filled with divine possibilities. Is that fair to say?
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely. That was really, as I started to write for the book after kind of thinking about these different themes, that was one of my hopes, was to capture those little joys. That they've got a lot of little flash essays in the book called Little Joys, of these moments that are in our, mundane lives that are really proved to be just as sacred as the times that we think we have to go away for, retreat into, in order to find the Lord. But he's present in even these little joyful moments.
Yeah. Yeah, you talk a lot. I mean, you certainly tell family stories. You talk about your growing up years. You talk about parents, grandparents, family. Um, what? How did those all those experiences that you mentioned? You even have You even talk about the difficulties of pregnancy. You open yourself up and sort of share with us those. I think those moments that there are a lot of women who read that could relate to, right? And you try to put that into a larger context. Um, do you find? I mean, do you have these mundane moments, and in that mundane moment, you kind of think, okay, there's something going on here that's bigger, or do you find most of the time you got to look back on it? That looking back on it, then you say, oh, I see now, something bigger going on.
Yeah. I think it's a lot of that reflection later on that happens. I often come to writing as prayer. Um, I feel like when I engage with the Lord through my writing, that's the place where I have the most dynamic conversations with Him. He, I have revelations as I'm writing that I would never have gotten to if I had just kept on chewing on it in my brain. There's something that happens for me on the page that doesn't happen anywhere else in my life. And so when I have something that I'm really wrestling with, especially, and don't have answers, I find that when I start to write, that's when the knot starts to loosen, and I might start to have some epiphanies or observations that probably weren't there in the moment, where I really did need to process through whatever difficult experience it was that I was having. And, usually like I might start thinking I know what I'm going to write about, but about halfway through, I'm like, oh, that's what this is about. Oh my gosh. And then, the tears start flowing, and you're like, okay, thank you, God. But I didn't really want to go there.
Yeah,
So it's,
you almost have
trying to
to.
press through that.
Yeah, you almost have to work it out in the midst of the writing in order to see where it's going.
Yes.
Yeah, very good.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, I find
So,
that if I think that I know what I'm going to say, it kind of and maybe it's different, if I'm teaching something, I usually know I want to talk about this thing, but I can't view my personal writing that way as if I'm the one who's got all the answers. I feel like an essayist especially needs to come to the page with her questions and hold those questions open, and maybe they're not completely resolved by the end, but at least we've gone on a journey together to try to explore those questions together as reader writer, or just as writer and divine, spirit.
yeah. You certainly, again, you tell a lot about family. I want to talk about a little bit that in a minute, but
Hmm.
I'm just curious. I'm sure family members have read this book. Did they express? Did they say, "I can't believe you told that story about me," or something, something like that, or did they say, "Wow, I didn't realize that, that event or that meant so much to
Yeah, probably my biggest fan is my mom, and she reads everything that I write. I'm pretty sure she reads everything that I write anyway. And she's always really open about sharing her reactions to different things. But the rest of my family, if they have read the work, don't typically tell me, so I don't know what they think.
Yeah, that is kind of interesting because it's the same way with me. I don't know that my family has read a whole lot of stuff, you know, and I don't know if
Yes.
it's I cynically sometimes say familiarity breeds contempt, but then other times I think,
Yeah.
my kids and my wife, they've all heard me time and time again. So, like reading
Yeah.
what's new, I don't know, but it is interesting. So,
Yes.
well, it's great that your
Yeah.
mom
Now
has.
my husband has
Yeah,
definitely. Oh, I was going to say my husband has read all of this
yeah,
book and previous books where I've been very vulnerable about our relationship. And,
yeah.
for me, like writing is very important, but relationships trump writing. And
Mhm.
so I always want to honor my who become characters, the people in my life who become characters on the page in a way that is honest, but not, you know, well, in a way that's honest and true. So, even when I have to portray somebody in, what might seem like a more negative light or the way that I've experienced something, I still want to do that with love, So, my husband has been one of the greatest supporters of my work and views a lot of my writing as our like marriage ministry kind of,
Oh, that's
So,
great. That's really great. Yeah.
it's good.
Terrific.
Yeah.
Yeah, one of the things you say that context of course matters in the stories. I mean, and this comes out in your book. You're you're sharing spiritual insights through the lived realities of your life. So you actually come from you live now in small town Ashland, but you don't come from small town Ashland, right? Was it Akron, as I
Right.
recall? And
I grew up in Geauga County. My
oh,
husband grew up in Akron.
where
Yep.
did you grow up in Geauga County?
Auburn Township, a tiny little
Okay,
place.
I spent time growing up in Chesterland. Yeah, in Newberry.
All right,
Okay,
yeah.
all
We're like
right.
next
So,
door neighbors then.
you say that in the book. I don't know why that just didn't stick with me, but you did move to
It's
Akron.
okay.
So
Yes.
what is the so what how has this so you've lived in different kinds of contexts, right? Uh, you grew up well, you
Yes.
were in Auburn Township, so you were probably out in the country, and you talk about
Yep.
your grandfather was a farmer.
Yes.
Yeah. So tell a little bit about how that change of context, small town, rural, more city.
Mhm.
How does that how did all of that affect you as you made those changes? Because you do talk about that.
Yes, I do. There's several essays that kind of explore the the tension between absolutely loving the way that I was raised and the landscape in which I was raised in, and also, grieving maybe some of the prejudices or uh, uh narrow-minded aspects of growing up in a very homogenous community, very, rural community, um, because they're both there. It's not an either or. I didn't, hate my childhood and think that uh, everybody was, a bunch of racists or something. It was. I loved my childhood. I benefited a lot from growing up in a very beautiful family connected community, growing up in a out in nature, really exploring the farm and exploring the woods and just being immersed in nature and in a very loving family. And then exiting that space, coming to Ashland first, and then for a short period of time, I worked at Case Western Reserve up in Cleveland. And that gradual migration away from what I had always known also gradually broadened my perspective on how the broader world works or interacts, and the different values and perspectives that are out there that are beautiful and complex, and things that I had completely missed or just never been exposed to before. From the diversity of people to the diversity of perspectives and the different ways of viewing the world that are also within the realm of of God's world and God's kingdom. And so I try to, or I hope I have anyway, preserved both that appreciation for where I come from while also having different eyes for what I learned since growing up in that space, I guess. Um,
Yeah.
but it definitely, being in different settings and different cultures and different work environments has really shaped me over the last 20 years, I would say, in ways that I'm so grateful for, because it has changed my perspective on who God is and shaped my that understanding of my relationship with the Lord.
Yeah, so let's talk a little bit about that grieving aspects of your childhood, because it's very clear in the book that you had a great childhood and there's a lot of wonderful stuff
Hmm.
formative for you. But you also do talk a little bit about uh, certain things that
Yeah.
and we all have this. But one of the things that um, is becoming clear to me as I've gotten older is that if we're not careful, we tend to over sentimentalize our childhood in the past. Somebody
Yes.
says, "Oh, I miss the America I grew up in." Well, you don't. You can only say that if you have selective amnesia, right?
Right.
Or the good old days. These kids don't know how what it's like today and how great it was, and we blah 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 blah. And we do tend to push out of our mind the fact that yeah, the good old days had lots of good things about them, but they also had their problems. So talk about
Right.
that as you had a very positive, formative childhood, but there's those, as you just said, grieving aspects. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, the one essay that comes to mind immediately that is in the book is called Family Tradition, and my grandmother was this fantastic storyteller and had an impeccable memory for the past. And before she died, I was able to interview her a couple of times and take some notes on different things. And um, I love the way that families, families are creating their history as they go along. There's certain stories we choose to tell over and over again. And then there are the stories that never get told or, but are always somehow present. And a lot of times, when you're a child, you're not aware of the understory. You hear the overstory, the exciting, adventures out west or the funny stories from somebody's childhood, but the things that really truly actually shaped that our family are often hidden in the shadows and are, more secretive. Um and I I guess as a young adult and into my 30s and 40s, I have less patience for the secrets and don't want those backstories to be hidden, because I feel like in that case we end up starting to repeat history instead of learning from history. And so I think that's scary, but the Lord knows all the truths anyway, and if we're able to bring those things to him, then they can be redeemed and uh and reformed into something better and hopefully more beautiful.
Yeah, excellent, excellent. You just
Hmm.
mentioned growing up in a more homogeneous context,
Hmm.
and of course, as life takes you different places, that context becomes more diverse. Um, for some people, that's a real shock. When
Yeah.
they get outside that bubble, if you will, that they grew up in, not realizing they're in a bubble. Uh, tell us a little bit how that changed and shaped your thinking going into a more diverse
Yeah.
context.
I it's significantly changed the way that I think. I think I write in the book, I'm pretty sure that Auburn Township when I was growing up was 98% white, you know, and and maybe 2% other. It wasn't even able to be broken down into any other demographics really. And then moving to Ashland isn't a whole lot more diverse, but it's like 91% white and then 9% other. Um, and then, the short period of time where I lived in Akron, and then when I was working at Case Western, I was immersed into a truly multicultural setting. And I entered that setting with a lot of um, prejudices that I didn't really even realize were buried in my brain from conversations from my childhood or just random jokes or little little notes that would be said here and there that were really embedded in my understanding of the world, and were quickly challenged, and I felt a lot of shame, or feeling ashamed of the ways that I was the filter through which I was seeing the world, um and grateful at how quickly those things were being needing to be uprooted, because it made it initially very difficult for me internally. I'm pretty good at keeping like, oh, this is all wonderful. I am definitely figuring out how to work in a diverse workplace. But inside, I was having to deal with this like menacing little voice that would occasionally pop up some little phrase or like thought bubble from my childhood, and I'd be like, that is a lie, that is baloney, that's not true, I need to get this out. So I found that being in physically in those different spaces has really served to correct a lot of incorrect thinking, and even like beyond just being in a workplace that's much more culturally diverse, reading diversely, reading a broad array of perspectives and from different socioeconomic and demographic areas has really helped to shape and form the way that I see the world.
Good. Excellent.
In positive ways, I hope.
It does take a willingness to critically self-reflect, because I think for so many of us human beings, our default is rationalization. I don't want to believe that I have racial prejudices.
Mm-hmm.
I reject the Ku Klux Klan and white supremacy outright, and so therefore I think that
Right.
maybe I don't have some latent prejudices. It really takes a willingness to be vulnerable to oneself, doesn't it? To be able to say, you know what?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I've got that.
Yeah. And to be humble about, right, like recognizing that we all have some misunderstanding about how other people operate in the world. Most
Yeah.
likely we do anyway. Not all of us are going to figure it out, I think.
Wow. Yeah, that's great. So I want you to, now we're getting toward the end. There's a couple other things I want to ask you, but let me ask you to highlight one person that you talk about in the book, and how they shaped your life.
Could you repeat that, Alan? It was a little bit.
Oh, I'm sorry. How just mention one person you talk about in the book and how they shaped your life.
Okay. This book, I feel like a major aspect of my journey through ordinary time has been my mom's battle with cancer. And although it hasn't been my battle, I've been very close to her throughout her years of fighting stage 4 kidney cancer. And that, I guess, Lenten season of our lives together had really shaped a lot of my struggling and wrestling with ideas about God and trying to process through anticipatory grief, realizing for the first time that my mom isn't immortal, that she would eventually die, sooner or later. And wrestling with that all throughout my 30s, really, and journeying with her through her own struggles with this, coming to terms with living with a chronic illness. It definitely had a formative effect on my life. And then in the book, I explore, how my posture towards her, her cancer, her relationship to me, how it relates to my understanding of God. And then, it's kind of a spoiler alert, but is miraculously healed by from cancer. She's been cancer free now for over 2 years, which just wasn't supposed to happen. And that was yet another experience of God surprising me in a way that I didn't see coming. I kind of had blown off the idea that anybody could just be miraculously healed anymore. I'm like, yeah, that doesn't happen anymore. And it challenged and humbled me to have her be at this place when we did not think that she would be there. So her experience with cancer has been a really, and journeying with her through that has been a really formative experience for me. And then our relationship together just has been a really strong foundation throughout the last, well, my entire life, but especially in the last probably decade or so. So I touch upon that relationship several times throughout the book too.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wonderful. One more question. You working on anything at the moment?
I am. Yes, I'm 4 chapters away from the end of a first draft of a new memoir that really digs into awe and wonder, turning 40, being in the middle season of life, and is wrapped around 2 years ago when I turned 40. I took an out west trip with my family for 19 days, and we visited a lot of national parks. And so that book is exploring, it follows that trip, but also is exploring what does it mean to be at this stage of life, with our family, with creation in general. Where is God revealing himself in creation? What is our responsibility for creation as a humanity? And then just this, I have this great impulse and desire to give my children opportunities to experience awe and wonder at life in general. And I'm like constantly trying to open their eyes to what is around them, to be able to experience the mysterious, and be kind of right sized. We all are like walking around feeling really big, and we're actually quite small. So so it's a lot of that is what the next book will be about. It's due out in the spring of 2026, so it's a little bit a ways, but I'm right in the middle of that right now, and really enjoying that process. It's been a lot of fun to write.
Exciting. So when you were out west, did you stand next to a sequoia tree?
I didn't make it to that national park, unfortunately. Okay. I did as a child when I was 16. If you really want to feel
small, stand next to a sequoia tree. Yeah.
Yes. Okay. I remember that feeling. I would love to get my kids out there. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Sarah, thank you for this wonderful conversation. And I just appreciate your writing and reflections. And friends, I highly recommend Ordinary Time Meditations from the In Between. And I think, folks, if you read it, it'll do for you what it did for me. And that is, it started to stir up some of my own memories as I was reading the book. And so I think that it'll do that. So I just recommend that you get it. And we will put a link to the book in the description, both on YouTube and on the podcast. Do you have an author page on Amazon?
I do. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay. We'll link to that. All right.
And my website is sarahmariewells.com. So there's all kinds of
other. We're gonna put that in too. So we'll put all that in, and people will be able to check you out.
Wonderful.
Okay, very good, Sarah. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Thank you. So, friends,
thank you.
Thanks for joining us. This is Faith Seeking Understanding. I am Alan Bevere, and we remind you at the end, as we always do, that the patron saint of Faith Seeking Understanding is Anselm of Canterbury, who said, "I do not understand in order to believe, but I believe in order to understand." So, friends, keep seeking.